Half a day, this is Congressman Nicholas. While local COVID-19 testing has unfortunately become less available lately, there are 4 free at-home federally available COVID tests that you can have to test yourselves and your families as needed. Please contact your congressional office at 671-475-6453 or at michael.snicholas@mail.house.gov to find out how we can help you access those tests.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Fox News.
Former Clinton campaign lawyer Michael Sussman is responding to allegations made by special counsel John Durham over the weekend about the alleged infiltration of computers belonging to former President Trump.
In this latest Durham filing, the servers here at the executive office of the president, then Trump, may have had traffic improperly monitored by someone who was paid by the Clinton campaign as recently as 2017.
Fox's Peter Ducey. Sussman says Durham is tainting the jury pool by releasing this information ahead of his trial. Sussman was indicted by a federal grand jury in September for allegedly making false statements to the FBI, claiming he was bringing forward information about possible Trump-Russia communications as a concerned citizen and not on behalf of any client. Billing records seem to show otherwise. A former engineer with the U.S. Navy admits he tried to sell nuclear secrets to the Russians.
As part of his job as a nuclear engineer in the U.S. Navy, 43-year-old Jonathan Toby of Maryland had top-secret clearance, and federal prosecutors say he repeatedly sold information about nuclear-powered submarines to someone he thought represented a foreign government, but instead was an undercover FBI agent. Toby pleading guilty on Monday to 1 count of conspiracy to communicate restricted data, expected to face more than a decade in prison. He's also agreed to help federal officials find all of the classified information he has and the payments made to him, about $100,000 in cryptocurrency. Toby's wife, Diana, has pleaded not guilty, accused of acting as a lookout while her husband left memory cards with government secrets at dead-drop locations. Lisa Brady, Fox News.
New York City has fired more than 1,400 workers who failed to comply with the city's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, but the mayor's office says that's less than 1% of the city's workforce. The city in late January sent notices of up to 4,000 workers. They had to prove they'd been vaccinated or be fired. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Half a day. This is Claire Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
Half a day, this is Congressman Nicholas. While local COVID-19 testing has unfortunately become less available lately, there are 4 free at-home federally available COVID tests that you can have to test yourselves and your families as needed. Please contact your congressional office at 671-475-6453 or at michael.snicholas@mail.house.gov to find out how we can help you access those tests.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck, 0 down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at guamautospot.com.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I'm going to wrap this up with my usual saying of, let's go, Brandon. But there's a lot of stuff between the Second Amendment and let's go, Brandon. A lot of really, really good radio listening, a lot of good Facebooking. So if that's what you're interested in, you have come to the right place. Let's start out with Zemi Ikotny. Looks like the Daily News has finally gotten it right. The Daily News says, our view, extend the school year to make up for learning loss.
Did they poll the kids?
The Guam Department of Education is considering making summer school mandatory for students who receive the lowest grades, which could help a lot of students. But more students could be helped if the school year were extended to compensate for lost class time. Since the first pandemic-related closures in March 2020, students have shifted from in-person instruction to online learning and hard copy instruction. Cohorts were used to limit the number of students on campus at any given time, and children didn't return to 5-day in-person classes until November of 2021. Learning was disrupted for everyone. At a recent Board of Education meeting, member Robert Chrysostomo suggested that summer school should be mandatory for students who score in the lowest category of a new grading system, equivalent of getting a D or below in traditional letter grades. You know, this reminds me of a story of a guy I went to school with. Not stupid, but not very hardworking. So one day, one year or one semester, he brought home his report card and showed it to his dad. And his dad says, 4 D's and an F? How do you explain this? And the kid said, gosh, Dad, I guess I concentrated too much on one class. Yeah. The latest data indicate as many as 20% of students might fall into that category. On Sunday, Deputy Superintendent Joe Sanchez said the mandatory summer school plan needs to be approved, but it's likely. Last year, summer school enrollment sets records here and throughout the nation. About 20% of students on Guam, 6,000 kids, attended summer school, which was expanded to all campuses and included bus service and meals. Federal pandemic funding was used to pay for the expansion. Nationally, the school districts across the country took advantage of funding to help students catch up on classes. Students deemed high risk, those scoring the lowest grades, were targeted for summer school. They lost out the most when in-person classes were suspended. They were less likely to have computers and internet service to support online education, and they didn't necessarily have the support at home to help with remote learning. Sanchez said those students tend to have problems that extend beyond academics. While they might need the most help, they're not the only students suffering learning loss. Rather than providing limited services to a limited number of children, we should provide a longer school year to all students. Classroom instructional time is valuable, and all of our students have lost a lot of learning in the last 2 years. I couldn't agree more. So, but I guess the reason they came up with that particular solution to the problem is it didn't take time to poll the students who don't think that spending 24 days more in class would help at all. So there you go. Okay, there's a blue star for the Daily News. Congratulations, Daily News.
Bob, on the island, I didn't go to school here, private or public on Guam. Is there a standardized type of curriculum for the island whether it's elementary or high school, or is it each teacher has their own curriculum they put together?
Yes. Yeah, there's a standardized, but there's an awful lot of room for individual variations.
I went to high school, well, actually my junior and senior year in upstate New York, and they have something called Regents, and I think California does also. There's some good things and bad things about standardized teaching because we all took the same test statewide. But just my experience with summer school last year, because I had a boy who went through middle school summer school, and it wasn't really structured. It was more like day camp. According to him.
Yeah.
Was there any homework? No homework. We're just there to experience school. So I'm curious of what they're going to do if they do a summer school program.
An interesting question. If I were in a position to make the decision, I would have a rule that no one graduates from high school until he passes the GED equivalency test.
Very good.
Yeah, not a super.
It's not easy.
That's not easy, but it's not the highest of standards, but it shows that kids learn something in school, right? So, yeah, and that's, with 28,000 kids, 4,000 employees, 30-plus buildings, it's really hard to keep a handle on it all. Okay, so let's go next to the card. I better mark this down here for the Daily News. They don't get that many. That takes the Daily News to 76 blue stars. Candid has 7. Helen has 3. Yeah, Helen's moving up in the world. Okay, so this is what I've got. I've got Paul Zerzan versus systemic racism, of course, and Matt Wolf versus the Civil Service Commission. Therese Tetlahi versus the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. Robert Underwood versus the Territory of Guam, which is just actually more of what we've been talking about before. Robert Underwood versus oppressors, more Weir and Underwood versus our community, etc. Then I've got JMI versus Menzies. This is the case we've all read so much about. I guess when it comes to procurement on the island now, we're using the buddy system. Then I've got the Archdiocese versus abused kids. Wow. Equity versus society, Black Lives Matter versus society, some of the old stuff on the calendar. And once again, if you understand what's going on here, you look at the rice on that platter and you'll say, that's red rice. No matter how many people are saying, you're wrong, the color is orange. It may be true, but the narrative is red. And just for clarification today, I am wearing a red shirt again today. I'm not wearing the same red shirt I wore yesterday. I have more than one shirt. And more than one red shirt, as a matter of fact. But I just thought I'd wear a red shirt 2 days in a row.
I say your red shirts are very nuanced.
Thank you very much, Jose. It's the nicest thing you've said about me in quite some time.
It took some effort, Bob.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to Matt Wolf versus the Civil Service Commission. The fire department violated personnel rules on compensation for voluntary demotion when 3 employees were made to resign from other government positions to get hired at a starter pay rate when they entered GFD about a decade ago, according to a post-audit investigation at the Civil Service Commission. Now, I take issue with this whole post-audit thing. And the next sentence tells you kind of everything you need to know about this post-audit thing. The first word in the sentence. Now, this is a quote from an investigation report. Staff concludes that the GFT violated Rule 6.003, compensation adjustment following a voluntary demotion, etc. Staff concludes. So the way these post-audit works, everything else at the Civil Service Commission is the adversary system. You have management and the employee. Management fires, dismisses, or demotes. The employee appeals, comes before the Civil Service Commission. The rules are dramatically stacked in favor of the employee, as are most of the commissioners. So management proves it, puts on its case. The employee's representative, sometimes the lawyer, tries to rebut management's case, poke holes in it, come up with an alternate theory, whatever. But you have an adversarial system, just like the court system, where you have a plaintiff and a defendant, usually, unless it's our attorney general who wants to file papers with the court to defend the governor. Then you don't have it. Yeah, it's not what the attorney general did, it's what he didn't do. Yeah. So that's the way Civil Service Commission, and that's the way almost all tribunals work. That's the Anglo-Saxon, if you'll pardon the expression, common law system, which means that it can only be understood by white folks, right?
Non-aliens.
Yeah, according to Robert Underwood and Paris Hattori. Yeah. The civil system that was a takeoff of actually Roman law, which is used in most of the rest of the world. All of Europe is not an adversarial system. It's an inquisitorial system where you have a magistrate who goes out and develops the factual record and decides who did what to whom. It works pretty well for them. I don't think it works as well as our adversarial system because, just like Tall Tales, when you've got two people going at it with different interests, ordinarily you arrive at the correct result. You don't arrive at the correct result when staff decides these important questions. Nameless, faceless staff. Nobody knows who they are. No one has a chance to challenge them, etc. So, and like everything else at the Civil Service Commission, they're very employee-oriented. So when someone invokes this so-called post-audit jurisdiction of the Civil Service Commission, you can probably bet that the employee is going to win. Classic example of how it can go wrong was the gentleman who was hired in a position for which he wasn't qualified. He brought one of these post-audit things. The Civil Service Commission said, well, he should never have been hired because he wasn't qualified.
But pay him anyways.
Yeah. So when it finally wound up, he was reinstated with back pay. It's just a travesty, like an awful lot that comes out of the Civil Service Commission. So that's how it started. So what you had was 3 employees who worked somewhere else in the government of Guam. They wanted to be firemen, or should I say fire people. They wanted to be firemen, so they applied with the fire department. Fire department said, yeah, you can be you meet the qualifications, you can be fireman. We'll put you on the job, but you already got a job, so you're going to have to quit the job that you got, and then we'll sign you up as fireman. Civil Service Commission staff said that's not what you should have done. You should have transferred those people from the jobs that they had outside the fire department into the fire department with no probationary period, and they should have been making as much as they were making on their non-fire department jobs. Does that make sense to you, Jose? Let me see here what some of them did before they came.
Yep. One was a teacher.
Yeah, one was a teacher. Now, that's really good experience to be a fireman, right? Yeah. So, you know, and one was, let's see.
A dispatcher.
At the police department?
A GFD.
Yeah, at the fire department.
Yes.
Well, that makes a little sense.
A supervisor as well, emergency dispatcher supervisor.
Yeah.
That's Pangilinan. I don't see. Oh, and then one worked at the Guam Department of Labor as Program Coordinator 3.
That's really good experience to become a firefighter, right? Yeah.
Usually set fires, though.
Yeah. So staff went through the rules and said that's not how you should have done it. You gotta put these guys where they should have been 10 years ago. And you got to give them a big chunk of back pay. Now, the part that I find really interesting is this. The CSC had submitted a memorandum stating that, the CSC post-audit was based on a refiling of the request in late September 2021. The initial filing had run through the statutory 180-day deadline, with the CSC not able to complete the post-audit process. The CSC had submitted a memorandum stating that the deadline would expire in early August 2021, and the agency could not meet the deadline and comply with the requirements of the open government law at the same time. Well, that's pretty unreasonable, isn't it? However, the memo also stated that nothing prevented the 3 employees from filing their complaint again. If at first you don't succeed, try again. The 180-day deadline has been causing issues for the CSC, and the agency would like to have it extended. Oh, of course. The Office of the Attorney General, representing the fire department, filed a motion to dismiss the September post-audit request. Assistant Attorney General Matthew Wolf. We don't have that sound. We only have dogs, right? Yeah, Wolf attempted to get commissioners to discuss the dismissal motion during the investigation hearing last week, but was unsuccessful. So he made a motion to dismiss, apparently didn't get a hearing on it, tries to raise it at this meeting, and then he says, it's a violation of due process, he said at the end of the meeting. At the onset of the meeting, CSC Chairman Juan Calvo used to be the personnel management leader at the Civil Service Commission, and now he's on the commission. As I mentioned before, this should never happen. Anybody who works at an agency should never be on the governing board of that agency. CSC Chairman Juan Calvo instructed the parties that the hearing would be for staff to present their findings and would be strictly only on their representation. As Wolf attempted to speak throughout the hearing, he was reminded of the hearing purpose and was ultimately asked to leave the hearing room at the conclusion of the hearing. Asked to leave the room. How dare you come in here and try to represent your client? So I think there's more to this story than what the Post is telling us. I'm going to see if I can find out what Paul Harvey would call the rest of the story. All right, next we've got Therese Tetlahi versus the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. We've spent a lot of time talking about the Board of Medical Examiners, the complaints that have come before it, I suppose that what I would call the David Lebowski factor, a general dissatisfaction with not so much what the board has done, but what the board hasn't done. They don't seem to be moving these complaints forward. There's a Dr. Okama who has made quite a name for himself already, and the board apparently has taken no action whatsoever concerning him. So Therese Tetlahi had 2 oversight hearings on Wednesday. The first hearing will focus on the GBME's licensing discretion, procedures for doctors with complaints lodged against them in other jurisdictions, and how complaints are investigated. The second hearing will focus on the board's procedural discretion over licensing of physicians with complaints in other jurisdictions, public disclosure of current accusations and physician license revocations, suspensions, or other disciplinary action by other jurisdictions pursuant to the Patient Protection Through Information Act could also come up. The hearing will also go further into the complaint investigation and hearing timelines, as well as the procedure to update those who file complaints. Over the years and in recent months, the GBME has approved full licensure for several physicians with histories of complaints. Full licensure for them to practice locally. In January, the board approved 2 full licenses and 1 temporary license to doctors with spotty records. Spotty records.
They're really putting it on mildly.
Allegations of sexual misconduct against one doctor practicing on Guam were brought to the board's attention in recent months. Dr. Acoma, a private practitioner and owner of Hepzibah Family Medical Clinic, came under fire when 2 patients came forward with separate allegations of sexual assault and harassment. Both alleged victims filed complaints against Acoma with the board. One victim filed a report with GBME in 2020. That's already 2 years. I have a hard time getting used to the fact that that's already 2 years ago, but it is.
Yep.
Yeah. The second alleged victim filed in 2021. However, the board did not provide the 2020 alleged victim with any updates on its investigation until this year. The victim told the Post the only information received was that her case was reviewed on March 11, 2020, a week after the complaint was filed. It took 2 years to find out this information despite repeated calls to the GBME since filing her complaint. Last month, when allegations surfaced publicly, board chairman Nathaniel Berg did not respond to questions about how long the investigation stood still or why the complainants did not receive timely updates. GBME also did not respond to questions on the protocols in place for doctors facing allegations of sexual assault. During GBME's January meeting, Berg said no comments would be made on pending investigations. We talked about that before. I think that's the right decision to make. Berg's statement was made in reference to the 2021 alleged victim's complaint against Acoma, which is under investigation. The first woman's case preceded the 2021 victim by over a year. The woman stressed if they had taken her case seriously, there would have been no additional victims. Prior to practicing on Guam, Acoma had complaints filed against him in multiple states. Acoma left Iowa following allegations and was already practicing on Guam when his Iowa case was settled in 2018. Acoma paid a $5,000 fine and agreed to terms of probation. The terms of practice in Iowa included that Acoma must be accompanied by a board-approved female healthcare professional chaperone when treating female patients. Acoma was granted licensure to practice on Guam on October 27, 2017 under IHP Medical Group. An IHP staffer later filed a complaint with the GBME in 2018 raising similar allegations. Are we detecting a pattern here, Jose?
I think so.
Acoma, however, kept his license and was able to open a private practice. To date, it's not known how many local physicians have been granted licenses with prior disciplinary action by boards from other jurisdictions, how many are approved with conditions set by the board, or how many have violated those conditions. These issues will be addressed during the oversight hearing at 12:30 and 4 p.m. on Wednesday at the legislature. Well, it's a good article, and this is, talk about putting the agenda in the paper. We really know what's going to come on. So if you're interested in this, you know what to expect and to go to those hearings. I probably would myself if I had time, but I wonder if sometimes they schedule these things at 4 p.m. deliberately. 4 p.m. What time is Tall Tales again? 4. Let's have it at 4.
That's a badge of honor, Bob.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. Now, a little note on legislative investigations, legislative oversight. I think the popular idea is it's good that the legislature is holding these people accountable. And I hope that these people will get punished. The legislature will bring criminal charges. That's not what it's about, folks. There's only one reason that the legislature can have these wide-ranging hearings, and that is because they make laws. And the thinking is that because they make laws, they have to have a good understanding of what's going on in the community. They have to have a factual understanding of what the problems are, because this helps them fashion appropriate legislation. That's the reason that we have these oversight hearings. Not so sharp-tongued senators can put members of the administration in their place, which happens. All right, so much for that item on the card. Next, we go to Underwood versus Territory. And yeah, let's take a short break here.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Do you have a car? Do you want to get rid of it? Yeah, yes, there are people. Absolutely. How did you know? Here's the deal. Take your used car to the guys over at Nissan Guam, and they're going to take a look at it. And if they love it, and they probably will because you take care of things, you could get all kinds of money on this, cash for your car. Used car values are higher than ever before. They'll take all makes and models. Doesn't need to be a Nissan or an Infiniti. They'll give you a super fast appraisal, and you say, shoot, sign the papers. Now, you can use that as down payment on a brand new Nissan if you like, or maybe you need a used car. Maybe you're sitting around going, well, I guess somebody's going to come in, they're moving to Guam and whatever, and they're going to need a ride. So let's go to Nissan Guam and check out the great sale they've got. The Nissan Ninja sale is going on. So all those used cars that people are taking in, well, they refurb them, change out the oil and the belts and all of the things that need to get taken care of, and turn them practically into brand new automobiles and give you some incredible savings, up to $14,000 on the used car inventory. Go and take a look at it. NissanGuam.com.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So here we are, Underwood versus the Territory, and I am not done yet with Robert Underwood's confession. It's going to take me a while to work through this. In Robert Underwood's column that appeared in the Daily News Saturday before last, there was no column last Saturday. The column that appeared Saturday before last, the first sentence reads like this: I have been teaching critical race theory since 1972. Every course I have ever taught and nearly every public policy speech I have given in Washington or Guam involved critical race theory. That's wonderful. So, I'm a little bit at sea with myself, as the saying goes. Does Robert know what he's saying? Does he really understand what he's saying? Or does he not understand what critical race theory is? That's one way to go on it. The other way to go is to go the Amanda Shelton route. Or Amanda Shelton, when it was time to vote on the override of the governor's veto of Rule 11, passed 3 times and voted against the override. Causing, and I've gone into a lot of explanations of how senators play the same game that card counters do at Vegas when they're playing blackjack. And I've explained that, but this time, from now on, I'm going to take them at their word. So I'm going to take Amanda Shelton literally. She has had plenty of time to think about Bill 11, about what it does, what it doesn't do, etc. She probably should have been able to formulate her position, her voting position, within an hour after having read Bill 11 the first time, which was last year. Nonetheless, when it came time to vote, she sat in her chair at the legislature and 3 times passed, suggesting to me she hadn't made up her mind whether she was going to vote for it or against it. So I'm not going to give anybody any slack. I'm going to take you literally. I'm going to judge your performance based on the fact that you are presenting to me what I will consider reality. So she is so disengaged and so far out of it that in an important matter like that, she couldn't decide until her name was called 3 times, and then she finally decided to vote no. So I'm going to do the same thing here with Robert. Maybe he doesn't know what he's saying, but I'm going to take him as though he does know what he's saying, that he understands all the ramifications of critical race theory, and he is not only one who studied it, but we talked about praxis yesterday, but not only studied, but practiced critical race theory. So I've got a nice little workup here by a guy named Michael Gonzalez, who is a senior fellow at Heritage Institute's Allison Center for Foreign Policy and at the Angelus T. Arredondo e Pluribus Unum Fellow. Pretty smart guy. And he has come up with the 5 lies of CRT. So, Robert, I hope you're listening. I'm going to start out with lie number 3, because I think it's the biggie. Lie number 3, critical race theory is not Marxist. That's what they'll tell you. Oh, no, it's not Marxist. This is a lie spread by those who know it to be a lie and then repeated by the gullible, whom the Kremlin used to affectionately call useful idiots. Are we talking about one right now? All of the CRT firmament knows itself as being Marxist, an affirmation made by Angela Davis, if you remember back to the 70s. I do, Angela Davis. As you were Angela Harris, Delgado, as you were. Critical race theory came straight out of critical legal theory, sometimes known as critical legal studies, which came out of the critical theory of the Frankfurt School, which we talked about a great deal here. A group in the early 1920s who decided that Marx got it wrong. The clash cannot be between workers and capital. It has to be between oppressors and oppressed on racial lines. That's where critical theory came from. The Frankfurt School, which was the first and most important of the Western Marxist schools, and which, along with Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist in the 30s, replaced Karl Marx's economic determinism with the view that cultural superstructure or hegemony was what dictated the actions or non-actions of workers, not material relations. So that's one big lie. Here's the second big lie. The use of critical race theory is a cynical ploy by Republicans, of course. This falsehood is repeated sometimes by even people who believe there is a problem with what schools are teaching, but who hold also that critical race theory has been wrongly used by the anti-CRT movement. That's me. What we in this movement label CRT is CRT, critical race theory. Far from a cynical ploy, we can say that what is being waged at the moment is a battle royal for the soul of America, if not the West itself. And sometimes I think we're losing. When somebody like Robert Underwood, our representative in Congress, president of our university, comes forward and says, I've been teaching critical race theory since 1972. He even had to crib it a little bit to make it come out right. He was teaching critical race theory before anybody else knew what it was. All right. What the purveyors of CRT want to do is to replace what they regard as the American hegemonic narrative of white supremacy with their counter-narrative, which is Marxist. I've been saying this, you know, the system is so badly flawed, white supremacy, systemic racism, the system's so badly flawed, you can't fix it, you got to junk it, come up with a new one. In the States, it's Marxism. Here, it's separation from the United States. That's part of the long-term strategy, first conceived by Gramsci, the Italian communist, to infiltrate cultural institutions and destroy society's conceptual framework. Last year's mayhem facilitated their bid to usurp power. The anti-CRT pushback is just a matter of the American public, American people confronting this strategy and saying no. You know, when this article talks about last year's mayhem, we're talking about all the Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all the fires and riots and arson in American cities, right on down to little old Kenosha, Wisconsin. So that's, I think, the two most important. Now, let's go back to number one, which was just touched on a minute ago. Number one, CRT is not taught in schools. That's lie number one. This is one of the most often heard, the most superficial, and contradicted by Robert Underwood, and the easiest to dispel. Indeed, the smartest of the progressives, such as Rui Teixeira, have begun advising their ranks to abandon this clearly failed blunder. Still, the Joy Reids, also known as Joy Can't Read, of this world outnumber the Teixeiras, so it's worth taking a crack at this first. Of course, long, turgid texts by Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, godfather and godmother of the discipline, respectively, or any other CRT apologist are not being assigned to third graders. To do would probably constitute child abuse and violate several UN guidelines. But what matters in CRT is the praxis, the application of the discipline to real life in order to transform it, and this is certainly being done. Though CRT praxis was already in evidence in K-12 prior to 2020, the spasmodic disruption of American society by the Black Lives Matter organizations last year has made CRT explode. Such implementation of CRT, which is what praxis is, the implementation, violates the law, especially the Civil Rights Act and the Constitution, which prohibit, respectively, treating students differently because of their race or national origin, and the government's unequal treatment of Americans because of their race. As we can see, school boards and teachers' unions have been a great deal more forthcoming with their use of CRT, and we thank them for their candor. The news is full of it. You know, a guy went before the school board to protest, and the National Association of School Boards wrote to the Attorney General, said, these people are terrorists, people that come and speak up at school board meetings. A classic example of the praxis, right? You can't be coming in here and talking bad about what we're doing in the schools. That itself is terrorism, they want you to believe. Lie number 3, CRT is just a way to give previously marginalized people the attention they have lacked. This is probably the most pernicious of the lies. We heard it most recently from the lips of Brian Stelter, who probably was not being pernicious intent, just repeating something he had heard. This particular lie is based on the CRT and earlier critical theory notion that physical reality may be apprehended through the five senses, but is comprehended through conceptual superstructure that orders our thinking. In the race variant of CT, that is critical race theory, that superstructure is white supremacy, which, in the words of CRT scholar Richard Delgado, is embedded in the ordinary business of society. The conceptual superstructure is Eurocentric and wrongly universalizes a male, cisgender white view of the world that therefore must be problemized, which means destroyed. How awful that people should think that a male, cisgender white view of the world shouldn't be destroyed. It's got to be destroyed. It's awful. CRT, however, is not in the least bit interested in bringing minority voices to the forefront of debate. Witness the caustic, overly dramatic language that Bell himself used when George H.W. Bush appointed Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, or for that matter, the cruel buffoonery of Michael Eric Dyson and his treatment of the Lieutenant Governor-elect of Virginia, Winsome Sears, both of whom are African Americans, both of whom were made fun of by the people in the story. And, of course, we know what their sin is. Clarence Thomas is a classic Oreo. He's black on the outside, but he's really white on the inside. Uncle Tom, all the rest of that stuff.
Sounds like a great snack.
And I suppose the final verdict on Clarence Thomas is listening to Tall Tales and hear me say he's the best on the Supreme Court. He's the very best. Which some people would say, yeah, you really think so, Bob? Well, that's important. You're a lawyer. You ought to know this stuff. Others would say, you like Clarence Thomas? That just assures me that he's no good. CRT is only interested in promoting leftist voices that will help overthrow what they see as America's cultural hegemony with their preferred counter-hegemony, which is Marxist. What obtains then is the monolithic progressive thinking we see now on display in the media, the academy, entertainment, now the White House, and now Robert Underwood. None of the CRT's policy approaches, no holds barred racial preferences, the acceptance or even celebration of out-of-wedlock births, or the view that looting means redistribution, would be in the least help of any race or national origin. And then big lie number 4. Those opposed to CRT just don't want history taught. Here we have a bold-faced lie. It's not true of anyone in the space that I inhabit. That's what Mike Gonzalez says. It's not true of anybody he works with. I have never heard Chris Rufo, James Lindsay, Lindsey Burke, John Butcher, Jay Green, Nicole Neely, Max Eden, Bob Klitzkie, or anyone else with whom I have collaborated express a sentiment even close to this. You forgot. There you go, yeah. We all want American history taught, warts and all. Do we want children to be told the lies of the the lies of the 1619 Project, such as, for example, that colonists rebelled because they feared Britain would end slavery? That's that lady Hannah Jones, and just propaganda. No, because that came from the pen of a fabulist. Nobody in their right mind would want their children to be taught that 2 + 2 = 5 either. Well, that's kind of an open question. All right, let's take a short break and we'll move on with the next item on the card.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktat, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tuman location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Nicholas. While local COVID-19 testing has unfortunately become less available lately, there are 4 free at-home federally available COVID tests that you can have to test yourselves and your families as needed. Please contact your congressional office at 671-475-6453 or at michael.snicholas@mail.house.gov to find out how we can help you access those tests.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
All right, so here we are. Next item on the card, JMI versus Menzies. We've talked about this a lot, and it's like peeling an onion. Every time you peel off another layer, there's something underneath it that you hadn't expected. Local company JMI Edison has asked the Superior Court to disqualify Menzies Aviation from being an eligible contractor for the Guam Airport's baggage handling service for allegedly lacking a valid contractor's license. Meanwhile, Guam International Airport Authority on Monday confirmed the hiring of Air Services International Group, doing business as Menzies Aviation, under emergency procurement. Menzies is currently providing management and infrastructure support services to GIA baggage conveyance systems. GIA procured the services using the emergency procurement method of source selection provided by in Guam law. GIA spokesperson Rolanda Fasamali told the Post. GMI Edison seeks to be awarded the airport contract, saying it's the only responsible and responsive bidder to request for the proposals. The company brought its procurement protest to the Superior Court after the public auditor dismissed its appeal. JMI Edison said OPA's decision did not address the nature of its protest, which was GIA's selection of a baggage handling system vendor that does not have a Guam contractor's license to do the job. Currently, Menzies is performing for GIA under an emergency contract without appropriate licensing. This performance is occurring despite the fact that GIA counsel has informed the OPA that the issue of contractor responsibility had not yet been addressed by GIAA. GMI Edison, through attorneys Joseph Rashano and Josh Waltz, said in the February 10 complaint filed in the local court. OPA cited JMI Edison misconduct for presenting a contractor's licensing board document that the board as a whole did not approve, among other things. The CLB document essentially said a contractor's license is required for the work. That OPA decision led to the resignation of then CLB Executive Director Cecil Buddy Orsini. Maybe, I guess the allegation was that he was a buddy of JMI. The resignation at Adeloop's request for releasing the questionable document to JMI Edison. The OPA report was troubling, Adeloop had said. In his complaint, JMI Edison said it hopes the court could find Menzies' aviation proposal as non-responsive to the request for proposal, and the GIA must disqualify Menzies from award eligibility because it could not have legally and responsibly performed the work detailed under the RFP. It also hopes that the matter may be remanded back to the Office of Public Auditor with appropriate instructions, and that the court award JMI its attorney's fees, costs, etc. JMI said the public auditor's findings that its protest should be dismissed as a sanction was improper because it was arbitrary, capricious, clearly erroneous, contrary to law. Did I say wrong? Yeah. It said OPA imposed a sanction of dismissal without prior notice to all parties without an opportunity for JMI Edison to be heard. I mentioned that the other day, that BJ might have been well advised to have a hearing and say to JMI, hey, look, we've got the buddy or exchange here. What do you want to tell me about that? But he didn't. I don't know that this necessarily means what he did is fatally flawed, but we'll find out. JMI Edison also said in its complaint that the OPA incorrectly made no distinction between actions by the CLB executive director or CLB staff in determining whether or not an entity is properly licensed versus administrative hearings before the CLB regarding the issuance of CLB sanctions. OPA noted JMI Edison President Ed Elau's email to Orsini addressing the executive director as bro before asking him to sign an attached sample letter that would indicate Menzies does not have a proper contractor's license from CLB. The OPA, by failing to address the procurement failings of GIA, has failed to perform its duty under law, JMI Edison said. It also noted in its complaint GIA's untimely response to Guam's Sunshine Reform request for a procurement record and OPA's failure to review and find that the GIA procurement record was not kept in accordance with law. Now that's a biggie, and I like it because once again it's the Sunshine Law. JMI did a Sunshine Law on Menzies, which I'll pick up right after the big halftime show here.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Still watching and waiting. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Ukrainians on high alert for a possible Russian invasion, which their president said Monday would come on Wednesday. The State Department says they don't know that Russian President Putin has given that order yet, but from Kiev, Fox's Trey Yingst reports.
Updated intelligence indicates more than 130,000 Russian troops continue to stage on the border of Ukraine and could invade at any moment. Efforts for diplomacy continue. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. During Scholz's visit, protesters in the Ukrainian capital called on the German leader to punish the Russians, not the Ukrainians.
Russia's foreign minister says he's encouraged President Putin to continue diplomatic talk, but the State Department is relocating the U.S. Embassy from Kiev to Lviv, about 300 miles west. A response to the allegations from Special Counsel John Durham that attorneys for the Hillary Clinton campaign infiltrated servers used by Donald Trump and used data from them to concoct a connection between Russia and the Trump campaign. Attorney Michael Sussman, who's facing a federal indictment for allegedly lying to the FBI, says Durham is releasing the information now to taint the jury pool for his upcoming trial. Florida Senator Marco Rubio says he believes those involved in the scheme thought they'd never be prosecuted.
They think they can get away with it because the media will not report on it. If this was the other way, if this was a story about how the Trump campaign had hired some data experts and others to go out there and do this to President Clinton, this would be like we wouldn't be able to talk about anything else around here.
Senator Rubio on Fox's Special Report with Brett Baer. Thousands of Catholics who were baptized in Phoenix, Arizona may have to receive the sacrament again because a priest changed the word I to we during the baptismal rite. The Diocese of Phoenix says all of the baptisms performed by Father Andres Arango are presumed to be invalid. America is listening to Fox News.
Celebrating it at Mescla with their 3-course meal. Starting off your meal with a salad appetizer, followed by a main entree of your choice, and of course, to top it all off, to make Valentine's as sweet as the day itself, a melting lava cake with vanilla ice cream and caramel sauce. So what are you waiting for? Call them at 671-649-2652 or visit mesclaguam.com for reservations. See you there.
Podcasts.com.
Justin Trudeau invoking emergency powers to try and put down a protest by Canadian truck drivers over that country's vaccine mandate.
The Canadian Prime Minister appears to have simply run out of patience with the truckers and others taking part in the anti-COVID restrictions protests. He's telling those involved to go home.
Occupying streets, harassing people, breaking the law. This is not a peaceful protest.
Invoking Canada's Emergencies Act gives the federal government broad powers to tackle the crisis brought about by the protests, although the Prime Minister ruled out using the military, but he did threaten to tow away trucks and other vehicles, freeze truckers' personal and corporate bank accounts, and suspend their insurance.
Fox's Jonathan Hunt. The truckers' protest has entered its 3rd week. Federal prosecutors are expected to call their first witness in the morning in the hate crimes trial of 3 men accused of killing jogger Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia last year. In Monday's opening statements, the prosecutors said they'd show that each of the defendants has a history of making racist comments. In Minneapolis, federal prosecutors have rested their case in the hate crimes trial of 3 former police officers who were present but did nothing when George Floyd was killed by fellow officer Derek Chauvin. A mayoral candidate in Louisville, Kentucky says he has survived what may have been an assassination attempt.
A report of shots fired on Monday at attorney Craig Greenberg while he was in his campaign office. He was not struck and wasn't injured, although a bullet did graze Greenberg's clothing. Greenberg later posting on social media that he and his team are all safe. Police say a suspect has been detained, and while it appears Greenberg was targeted, detectives aren't commenting on a motive. Tom Rigotti, Fox News.
Wall Street on Monday, the Dow lost 171 points, the S&P 500 down 17. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Half a day. This is Claire Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
Hafa, this is Congressman Nicholas. While local COVID-19 testing has unfortunately become less available lately, there are 4 free at-home federally available COVID tests that you can have to test yourselves and your families as needed. Please contact your congressional office at 671-475-6453 or at michael.snicholas@mail.house.gov to find out how we can help you access those tests.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck. Zero down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at guamautospot.com.
Okay, here we are after that big halftime show that we've all come to like so much, one of the greatest halftime shows in the USA. Back to Tall Tales. It means we are now in the second half of Tall Tales on this Tuesday afternoon. And I left off talking about JMI Edison's Freedom as Your Sunshine request to the airport. And the Sunshine Law has two important aspects in this whole kerfuffle here, this whole kerfuffle involving Buddy, BJ, Menzies, JMI, and the airport. And the first one is that the JMI served a Sunshine Law demand on the airport saying, give us the procurement record. Now, part of procurement law is that for every procurement, there has to be an agglomeration of papers that are generated as the procurement unfolds. So if there's as an example, a letter from the contracting officer to one of the contractors, that letter's in the procurement record, and so on. So it is all there. But it's not something that you wait until the procurement's over and then say, okay, now let's put together the record. You agglomerate these papers as you move along. Well, when JMI said, give us a procurement record, the airport said, oh, we can't do that. It's going to take us a long time to gather all those papers. Well, it's going to take a long time to gather all those papers because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. So finally they did, and it wasn't complete, but this allows JMI to show the airport didn't do the procurement record that it's supposed to, which may very well be enough to set aside the bid all by itself. It's an important part of the procurement regime. The other place where the Sunshine Law was really important was with the bro letter.
Brogate.
Yeah, Brogate. Because Menzies sent a Sunshine Law request to Buddy, and Buddy sent back the letter that he got from John Elo of JMI, and the letter that he sent to BJ, which was just about identical. So if we hadn't had the Sunshine Law, perhaps neither one of those things would have come to light. So the point I want to make here is that the Sunshine Law is one of the best laws that we've got on the books. It's not perfect. It needs some tweaking, but it is a great device, a great anti-corruption device that's available to every single Tom, Dick, and Harry on this island. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be procuring. If you want public records from a government agency, you can get them. Maybe I'll talk more about that later on. So The case now involving this cast, an interesting cast of characters, is before the Superior Court. It will perhaps drag on quite some time unless JMI moves for injunctive relief to stop Menzies from operating the baggage handling system on this emergency procurement status that we were just alerted to. Very interesting story. Okay, we had a caller and he lost his patience and hung up, right, Jose?
He's hoping to call back. There was something I was supposed to find for you, but maybe he'll call. It's Bob Kelly. He wants to speak a little bit about this.
Okay. All right, good. Next we have the Archdiocese versus abusers. And we've got a couple articles here. We have one that ran yesterday in the Post and one that ran today in the Post. Today's article, Archdiocese to amend $34.38 million plan to pay clergy sex abuse claimants. Now let's just talk a little bit about bankruptcy in general. The two major kinds of bankruptcies are Chapter 7 and Chapter 11. A Chapter 7 bankruptcy is called a liquidation bankruptcy. In a Chapter 7, a bankruptcy trustee is appointed. The bankruptcy trustee gives notice to all the creditors of the bankrupt, who all come forward with their notices of claim, and he also finds out where all of the assets of the bankrupt are. He then, subject to certain exemptions, divides up the assets and sells them in such a manner to satisfy the creditors to the greatest extent possible. After that, the bankrupt walks out of the door with no debts whatsoever. He gets a clean start. The Chapter 11 bankruptcy is a bankruptcy that allows the bankrupt to continue to operate during the pendency of the case. It's often called a reorganization bankruptcy. And some of the things are similar. You have a trustee, you do a notice to creditors, you marshal the assets of the bankrupt, etc., but you structure things in such a manner that you allow the bankrupt to continue to operate, perhaps even after the bankruptcy is over. You do this by restructuring the debts of the bankrupt, the contracts and other obligations, etc. It's done through what's called a plan. And the bankrupt will come up with a plan and submit it to the trustee. The major groups in the bankruptcy are the creditors committee and the bankrupt. Now, the creditors committee represents all the creditors and is supposed to see to it that it use its efforts to get the largest award possible. And of course, the bankrupt goes the other direction. So here, Bishop Burns is the nominal bankruptcy trustee. He doesn't actually do it, but nominally he is. And then there is a creditors committee that represents all the creditors of the Archdiocese, most of whom are child sex abuse victims. So the creditors committee and the trustee are still struggling to try to come up with a plan for selling the assets of the Archdiocese and dividing the money up amongst the creditors to include the child abuse victims. Most of the church's assets are real property. And one of the battles that's already been fought was the church's, the Archdiocese's position that it did not own the schools and churches, that these were independent legal entities, and that although the title to those entities was in the Archdiocese held the title only as a trustee for the beneficiary churches and schools. Therefore, the debts of the Archdiocese would not be paid out of the assets of the trustee, of the corpus of the trust, the schools, and the churches. So that's where this article picks up. The Archdiocese is the first property on the creditors committee's list. For example, let me back up a second. Two competing plans are up for hearing on March 4. The Archdiocese seeks to pay the abuse claimants and other creditors $37.96 million to $34.38 million, while the Creditors Committee plans involves payment to abuse claimants of at least $100 million and real estate assets. The two completing plans are set for hearing on March 4. The Creditors Committee listed about 100 properties that seeks to be transferred to a trust that would be used to compensate creditors, but indicated only the lot numbers and locations and not the name of the buildings or other identifiers. The Archdiocese said the first property on the Creditors Committee list, for example, only identifies it as AGA 13 and Lot 8-1, Block 22, Agania. The limited information, according to the Archdiocese, is meaningless to most persons who read the committee's disclosure statement. That piece of property is the location of Kusina Kamalin. I thought they changed the name of that place.
That might, yeah, but that could be still in the document, right? Even though it's DBA something else.
I thought it was supposed to be the church's Meals for the Hungry or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you know what? They did mention that it has to be recognizable, and I think they did that on purpose because people recognize Kamalin Caradot, but it is a different name. You're right.
Yeah. All right. The piece of property's location of Kusina Kamalin, which provides food and clothing to the poor and operates a soup kitchen, the Archdiocese said. The Archdiocese also said some of the properties that the Creditors Committee listed have encumbrances and restrictions. An example of this is the committee listed Jonia lot that the Archdiocese said pertains to the former Axion Hotel. This property is already sold and cannot be transferred into the trust, the Archdiocese said. The Archdiocese, in its objection to the Creditors Committee payment plan, identified each of the estimated 100 properties, which include the areas where the parishes and schools sit, cemeteries, empty lots, and parking lots. Archdiocese attorneys asked the court to require the Creditors Committee to provide this information as well. So that's where we are. So there's quite a gap then between what the Archdiocese wants to pay and what the Creditors Committee wants to get paid. And of course, the worst case scenario is that all of the churches and schools go into this trust. Now, I suspect that the thinking is that the trustee can sell some of the churches and schools, perhaps charge rent for some of the churches and schools, but it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. A really interesting but extremely sad story that goes all the way back to our former Archbishop Anthony Apparon.
Did you hear Archbishop Burns' homily this weekend?
I did not.
His very last words is that we cannot remain silent. And I think that was an indictment of the island, and not to press guilt on anybody else, because this was Archbishop Apparon's doing and everybody he protected. But he was right. We have to start speaking up also. And that's what happened. You know, you were part of the Concerned Catholics of Guam.
Right.
But my other question in this is, the judge at one point talked to the attorneys and said, your fees are starting to get exorbitant. At what point, what's the threshold where the payout's going to go more towards the attorneys and less to the victims?
Well, this is always a danger in a bankruptcy, especially a complicated bankruptcy like this. And I think I have another article here.
Are they asking more because of the fees?
Where the church asked for permission to hire another firm to litigate this matter, to litigate the theory that the schools and churches are part of a resultant trust. And Jay said, no, I'm not going to do that. I've already decided that. And that's one of the things that the judge has to keep her eyes on, the fact that, you know, that the money doesn't get squandered on attorney's fees instead of going to the claimants. It's a matter, I suppose, of Kentucky windage on the part of the judge as much as anything else. Okay, next we have equity versus society. And this kind of gets into what we've been talking a lot about, the subject of the Helen Middlebrook story the other day, the whole Durham, the whole blackout of any Durham, any information coming from the Durham investigation that almost puts a smoking gun in Hillary Clinton's hands. So this is from the Spectator World, and it's titled "Big Tech's Crack Pipe Cover-Up." And it's equity versus society. A throwaway line item in an otherwise innocuous spending package unveiled one way the Biden administration and the Democrat Party sees, quote, racial equity. The Washington Free Beacon revealed a week ago that the Department of Health and Human Services would be distributing free crack pipes to drug users to promote hygiene and advance racial equity. Get that? Advance racial equity, providing free crack pipes. The cost was around $30 million, and the program is similar to what left-wing fiefdoms like Seattle and San Francisco already do. The story had all the elements of tabloid gold, even better in clickability than the last Biden crack pipe story. You remember the last Biden crack pipe story? That's Hunter's laptop. Easily digestible in a single headline, sparing readers from grisly images of the president's son getting a foot job, the story also succinctly validated everything we already know about Democrats, their priorities, the left's grotesque and fundamentally evil treatment of the black community. Now the word equity comes up. Equity is, of course, intentionally and stridently divorced from racial equity, but in a way the party hopes you won't notice. The equal society, a battle cry of the old school liberal, we now understand it was a platform on which to build the equitable society. So racial equity means giving crack pipes to crack users, many of whom, of course, are African Americans. So, shouldn't they have nice crack pipes too? You could probably even engrave a picture of the president on the side of the... Anyhow.
Pure crack pipes.
The equality, it turns out, was a bit too conservative in practice, was pretty much already in place, and for the left, nauseatingly in step with the U.S. Constitution. Powered by grievance and emotional bullying, equity is vengeful and destructive. It's the chilling, green-eyed, incremental seizure and distribution of all resources and opportunities based on fluid and ever-changing criteria determined by an elite few at the top of the government and their corporate partners. But the word itself sounds so close to equality, most people haven't noticed. And if they did, assume the two were synonymic and interchangeable, if they don't listen to tall tales, that is. Now we get into the other part of the story. The Free Beacon story reveals something more telling about the dirty age of institutional gaslighting we live in. Mainstream media, so-called, quote, fact-checking organizations, and big tech immediately ran cover for the administration, with Democrat mega donor Mark Zuckerberg again being the most shameless, finger-wagging old biddy. Memes about crack cocaine got slapped with Instagram's missing context label. Warning. I scrolled past a Forrest Gump meme reading, and just like that, crack was safer than ivermectin. To be told by Instagram in alarming red type, independent fact checkers say information in this post is missing context and could mislead people. To be fair, nothing gives me more joy than Instagram fact-checking memes. I just wish they'd apply the same standards to selfies. Missing context, the angle this photo was taken is hiding multiple chins. That would be the meme of guess who, right? Missing context, this image has been dramatically altered in Facetune. Missing context, this is a post-workout pump, and he won't look this swollen in about an hour. Missing context, this is not his boat. Zuckerberg's Facebook then used a fact-checking service no one else has ever heard of, called Lead Stories, to censor the report about the crack pipes, right, as false information. Lead Stories, whatever the hell that is, was founded by former CNN journalist and Democrat donor. Snopes, the last stop for the wine-swilling cat ladies who couldn't make it in news reporting, marked the story mostly false, a story about the crack pipes. Mostly false. Their reasoning, crack pipes were just one of around 20 components of the grant program.
Wow. Wow.
Mostly false. Snopes.
Yeah, mostly peaceful.
Yeah. So there you go. It's exactly what Helen was talking about, what the Durham article, and what I talk about almost every day about big media, the media cartel, and some of the local media gaslighting its readers.
And again, Helen got the Facebook treatment from the Post.
She did indeed. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Your letter's interesting, but we already did that. Sorry about that, Helen.
Even though we buried it in a small little column.
Exactly. Okay, it's time to go to Wrigley Field for the stretch. Kelly was on and off again? No.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Do you have a car? Do you want to get rid of it? Yeah, yes, there are people. Absolutely. How did you know? Here's the deal. Take your used car to the guys over at Nissan Guam, and they're going to take a look at it. And if they love it, and they probably will because you take care of things, you could get all kinds of money on this, cash for your car. Used car values are higher than ever before. They'll take all makes and models. Doesn't need to be a Nissan or an Infiniti. They'll give you a super fast appraisal, and you say, shoot, sign the papers. Now, you can use that as down payment on a brand new Nissan if you like, or maybe you need a used car. Maybe you're sitting around going, well, I got somebody's going to come in, they're moving to Guam and whatever, and they're going to need a ride. So let's go to Nissan Guam and check out the great sale they've got. The Nissan Ninja sale is going on. So all those used cars that people are taking in, well, they refurb them, change out the oil and the belts and all of the things that need to get taken care of, and turn them practically into brand new automobiles and give you some incredible savings, up to $14,000 on the used car inventory. Go and take a look at it. NissanGuam.com.
Okay, here we are back on Tall Tales here in Wrigley Field, 7th inning stretch. Chicago, the world's most beautiful ballpark. Doesn't get any better than that. And it looks like Bob Kelly has finally figured out our phone system. Bob is a technological whiz, but he's finally cracked the code on our phone system. So glad to have you on board, Bob.
Well, what was difficult was how I could get some papers into your hands to discuss. I can call easily, but getting papers.
Well, you don't have to get papers in my hands to discuss things with me. I've got pretty good ears.
I know, but when we're talking about law, we like to know exactly what it says, not what we would like it to say.
Well, it depends on what party you belong to.
Well, okay. I sent you a little bit relating to Guam Contractor License Board. Number one, I'd like to bifurcate the contract from unlicensed contractors, because that's two separate issues, even though they're related.
Now, Bob, I know you're a regular here, so I know that you've heard me read in the rules of engagement here for Tall Tales.
Okay.
And one of the things that we don't allow on Tall Tales is soapboxing. So if you have a point to make your point.
Well, I'm separating the contracting.
Bob,
I'm not going to talk.
Bob, we don't. Filibusters also are not allowed. So no soapboxing, no filibusters. The objective is to have good talk radio. So let's start out by having you make your point. Go ahead.
The point is, separate from the contract, that's contractor. If they're doing unlicensed work, the executive director of the Contractor License Board, not the board itself. If you read in the law that I sent you on the second page, it is the executive director who can provide the cease and desist order and to stop work if they're not licensed. And if they're not licensed, they would be subject to a penalty of 50% of the value of the project.
Okay, good. Let's stop right there. Let's stop right there. Now, did Cecil, Buddy, Orsini exercise that authority over Menzies?
Apparently not.
Okay, go on to your next point.
Okay. The other one, which I said before, is, and if you go through other pages here, the issuance of who is licensed contractors is part of the executive, not part of the board responsibility. And that's what he did as far as the under the Sunshine Act, giving that to the OPA. And
okay, read that section, Bob.
Which section?
The one you just mentioned.
The Sunshine Act? I don't have the Sunshine Act.
No, the part that the executive director is the one who determines whether or not a contractor is licensed.
The executive director may issue a cease work order to any person's construction activity found in violation
hold on,
of this chapter.
Bob, slow down. Start over.
The executive director may issue a cease work order to any person's construction activity if found to be in violation of this chapter and or any of the contractor license board's rules and regulations.
Okay, so did he issue such an order to Menzies?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, anything else?
Well, I think the current director, if there is work being done, it falls incumbent upon them to issue that cease work order.
May that very, very well be.
So I think what I'm trying to concentrate is, while they're arguing in courts the contract, if the contractor is not licensed, they should have a cease work order, and they should be subject to the civil penalties per the chapter.
Okay, that sounds right. So what we do is we keep coming back to the non-functioning contractors licensing board, because you've just shown us authority in the executive director where if in fact Menzies is not licensed, he could stop them from working, and he hadn't. And the last time we talked about this, there is a question as to whether or not Menzies is required to have a contractor's license for the work that it's doing.
And I would agree, depending upon the scope of the contract. Like I explained today on another radio show, same station, if you have a service contract for a generator to fix a generator, that's a service contract, and I don't believe a contractor license is required. But if you're going to be maintaining and installing transfer switches and the wiring for that, that would require a contractor's license. So you got to get down to the scope of what's being done. If they're dealing with PLCs and motor control centers, they should have a license.
Yeah, well, at this point, since we're not the trier of fact, I think we identify it as an issue that has to be adjudicated, and that's as far as we're going to be able to go. Although perhaps a senator could introduce a bill that would grant the host of tall tales plenary authority to deal with these matters. That'd be a pretty good idea. I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to do that or not. It'd be too much work. But anyhow, anything else, Bob?
Well, I just wanted to kind of go back and say that this is a separate issue on the unlicensed from the contract, and they should put a cease to it if it requires a license. That's where we need to, not only on this, but I'm dealing with another case where this is an absolute situation. It happens to be on cabling and wiring for schools. You can't do that work without a license, and yet there's an unlicensed person with it. So I'm certainly going to be down kind of requesting that there be action by CLB if there's any work being done by an unlicensed contractor.
So the fundamental failure here is Buddy Orsini and the Contractors Licensing Board. Now, I mentioned earlier in the show that it'll take a while for this case that JMI has filed to migrate through the courts unless JMI brings a motion for injunctive relief, which it may very well do along the lines of what we've been discussing.
I think that's a good tactic for all the current unlicensed contractors. There's more than one that's going on. But that, again, if the government of Guam gives a contract, that's not the violation that I look at. It's that when they begin doing the work they aren't licensed to, that's where the relief needs to come in by either the contractor license board. And if they refuse to do that, then I think your strategy is correct. Go to Superior Court and get an injunction that forces the contractor license board to follow the law.
Yeah, well, I always start out with the proposition that we expect government officials to do their duty. Sometimes we're disappointed. So it looks like what we're dealing with here is systemic misfeasance or systemic nonfeasance.
But only sometimes you're disappointed?
Well, yeah, you know, when you get old, you get kind of thick-skinned and everything. It takes a lot to disappoint you.
Okay. Nice talking with you. I just wanted to point out the separation of the unlicensed contractor from the contract.
Okay, Bob. It's always a pleasure having you on board.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, so once again, Buddy Orsini didn't have to write his memo. If in fact, and that's important, if in fact Menzies needed a license, didn't have one, and was doing the work, then according to Bob, Buddy could have gone out there and said, hey, time out, cease and desist, buddy, partner.
And where he says it's a separate, kind of a separate thing, I'm recalling the OPA's technicality, and I know technicalities sound like pejoratives, but it's very important here, is that he really didn't write the memo. He had it written for him and plagiarized it without any action on it. Just like, okay, I'm going to put my signature to it.
Exactly, yeah. Well, you know, even if it hadn't been for the bro memo, there's plenty to chew on here. This is an interesting, serious subject. But, you know, the bro memo is the shiny object, and everybody kind of concentrates on that. But there's a lot of other things going on here. The lack of a procurement record, to me, is very serious, yeah. But I think if you had to distill it down, Menzies is an off-island contractor. JMI is a contractor. They've got skin in the game. They've got big money riding on this. they're going to pay particular attention to doing what they're supposed to do and doing it right. Buddy Orsini apparently didn't have that same discipline and just kind of let things go until someone who may have been his friend came along, and then he could instantly he couldn't do his job, but he could do a favor, is the way it kind of looks, doesn't it? And that is the road to just horrible government, when government runs on the basis of people doing favors instead of doing what they're supposed to do. Well, I'm glad Bob's out there watching. I'm sure glad he cracked the code on our telephone system here. He's a pretty tech-savvy guy. But he's a good community watchdog to ride herd on this stuff. Okay, let's see. I got about 20 minutes to go here. I've got another item I'll start, probably go to Churchill Downs and then come back. This is a Jim Moylan bill. Bill lowers threshold for voter initiatives, none successful in the past 26 years. In the past 26 years, voters have only approved initiatives twice, neither of which were placed up for consideration by the electorate itself. New legislation from Senator Jim Moylan proposes lower thresholds for proposed laws to be put on a general election ballot and allows for approved initiatives to be enacted if the local government fails to provide timely information on fiscal impacts. While many of the requirements in the initiative process this is a quote from Jim, are practical and greatly needed, there are certain hiccups which make the process either challenging or impossible. Hence, the intention of this act is to amend those hitches, to allow the intent of the law to achieve its objectives. The findings and intent of Bill 241-36 state. If passed into law, groups looking to put their initiatives on an election ballot would need to collect fewer signatures in order for the GEC to advance it. The two approved ballot initiatives since 1996 began a medical cannabis industry and reduced the legislature from 21 to 15 members. Both were made electoral policy issues through legislation enacted by the senators and the governor. Now, the way the initiative process is supposed to work is this. The proponent is supposed to write out his initiative. It's sort of like 400 or 500 well-chosen words, supporting documents, etc. He is then supposed to procure, I don't remember, but a substantial number of signatures on his petition. He is supposed to then submit that to the Election Commission, and then there's some other hoops to jump through, and if all of those things are done, then the Election Commission will put that proposed law on the ballot. And if a majority of the voters vote for it, it then becomes law. It's never happened. It's been on the books since 1968, and it's never happened.
The proposed law never is accepted by the public. Is that what?
We never even got one on the ballot.
Oh.
I think. Well, anyhow.
Wasn't there a Proposition A? Is that something different? Well,
yeah, you're right. Yeah, it never got through the voters. You're right. Okay. So now with the cannabis and the 21 to 15, what happened was the legislature passed a law saying there shall be a referendum on this particular question. And Forbes was a proponent of 21 to 15. And I think Tina Rose Munya Barnes was a proponent on legalizing cannabis. Actually, it was medical cannabis to start with, right?
Backdoor.
Yeah. And so those went on the ballot, and they were approved by the voters. But the other ones, it never happened. Before I go farther here, the dynamics are this. My own personal dynamics are, once upon a time, I used to think, I don't like the idea of initiatives. You know, drafting statutes and enacting statutes is not a job for amateurs. We should let people who know what they're doing do it. Well, after observing our legislature over the long haul, I realized that isn't what's going on. We might as well let the amateurs take a crack at it. It couldn't be any worse. So what happened was John Baldwin came to town. And John Baldwin wanted to convert the dog track, or wanted to have casino gambling at the dog track. And he tried at least one initiative, more than one, and wasn't able to get it through. We've had more than one initiatives on casino gambling. And Judy Guthertz, took offense to this and decided we'll make it really, really hard to do an initiative. Because every 2 years, we don't want to be doing this gambling initiative thing. And that's kind of where we're stuck right now. So I'm going to go back to this article here. Since 2006, 6 voter initiatives were processed through the Guam election. So it was 6 went through the Election Commission at the request of a voter, according to data shared with the Post. Only one of those initiatives failed to be placed on the ballot. In 2008, a proposal to turn the legislature into a part-time body did not meet the requirements to be voted on that year's general election, the GEC stated. The 5 other initiatives all failed to be approved by the electorate by a standard margin of 50% plus 1. 4 of them related to more forms of gambling locally. One was an unsuccessful attempt to raise the drinking age to 21 that voters considered in 2006. Around 4 years after that, senators, then acting Governor Mike Cruz, increased the drinking age to its current 21 through legislation. Good law. The major changes proposed by Moylan's bill include 1, reducing the number of village meetings held to discuss a potential ballot initiative from 10, including in the 6 villages with largest numbers, to 3, 1 in each in the northern, central, and southern parts. I think that should be just taken out. 2, lowering the number of voters required to support the initiative on a qualified position from 10% of all registered voters to 10% of all votes cast in the last gubernatorial election. 3, removing the need for voters to disclose their Social Security numbers. Whoa, on petition.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, petitions supporting proposed ballot initiatives, replacing that identity verification with a voter's date of birth, which will be fine with everybody except some women. Allowing failed initiatives and initiatives approved with less than 60% of the vote to be reconsidered by voters sooner, lowering a statutory ban on them from 10 to 4 years. That's Judy Guthertz. You do an initiative and it fails, 10 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and it's unnecessary. Requiring that government agencies submit fiscal impact statements and rules needed to implement voter-approved initiatives by certain time frames, or waiving the requirement if the bill's proposed deadline isn't met. While the bill's current effective date would be immediately upon its enactment, previous election bills from Moylan Pass recently have been delayed so it doesn't impact the 2022 elections. It shall also be noted that this act does not intend to weaken the process for voters to pursue an initiative, but to provide them a reasonable opportunity to participate, the legislation states. A good start. I think it needs a little more work, but Jim, I think, has finally got one there. Okay, we've got Ron McNench on the line. Afternoon, Ron.
Hey, happy day, Senator. Happy day, Guam. Yeah, I think probably even Judy would at this time probably say that, the initiative law could be improved. I've talked to her a couple of times about it, and she was well-intentioned when she wanted it changed. But I wanted to mention really quickly the initiative and referendum rights that we have are in the Guam Organic Act. And if you take a look at the U.S. Virgin Islands laws that apply to the Virgin Islands, the initiative process is a federal statute. That is, it's laid out in the federal law how they're to operate initiatives. And in my view, it's far superior to either the existing law that we have or even proposals made to change the existing law. In fact, the U.S. Virgin Islands method not only makes it fairly convenient for people to put things on the ballot, but it also allows for the legislature to concurrently put its own counter initiative or modified initiative on the ballot too. And whichever of the two get the most votes, basically a sufficient number are approved. And so that is, if you meet the 50% plus one, and if both of them meet 50% plus one, the one with the most votes wins, so to speak. And so it gives the legislature a little bit of a check on the initiative while the initiative is being considered. And I do think that the gambling people totally ruined the spirit of the initiative process for Guam. It was such a hectic time for Guam, and they were suing people and turning people off. It was just crazy.
Yeah, I remember that.
They were, I think that, it was like every election they wanted to put something up on gambling over and over again. And I think the legislature or folks just got tired of it. But anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on initiatives.
Okay, Ron. Well, we'll give you a penny back in change, okay?
All right. Have a great day, sir.
Thank you. All right, so let's head for Churchill Downs.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. While local COVID-19 testing has unfortunately become less available lately, there are 4 free at-home federally available COVID tests that you can have to test yourselves and your families as needed. Please contact your congressional office at 671-475-6453 or at michael.stnicholas@mail.house.gov to find out how we can help you access those tests.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
So here we go with Churchill Downs, about a furlong and a half, and I will hit the finish line for today's Tall Tales. It'll be Let's Go Brandon time, and let's see, in about 6 minutes. So I've got one more item here that I want to cover. If I can't finish it today, I'll pick it up tomorrow. It's Justice Sotomayor versus teachers. And a reference to the Law and Order Notebook is necessary to understand this one. Supreme Court rejects New York teachers' religious exemption appeal over vax mandate. The Supreme Court on Friday shot down an appeal from a group of New York City teachers who sought to block a COVID Wuhan virus vaccine mandate, arguing it violated their religious freedom. Justice Sotomayor rejected the emergency appeal on Friday, the same day as the deadline for city employees to comply with a mandate or face losing their jobs. Now, you're wondering how that appeal got to the Supreme Court so fast, right? And the reason is that it's not really an appeal. It's what I refer to, and what scholars refer to, including me, as the Supreme Court's shadow docket. So these teachers brought suit in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, which is Manhattan, seeking an injunction against these vaccine mandates. The district court ruled against them. They took appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, once again in New York, and lost. They then appealed to the Supreme Court and asked for a stay on the order of the courts below. In other words, well, actually not a stay, actually a stay on the firing, the terminations that were to come from the violation of the mandate order. And I've explained before that when those go to the Supreme Court, they can be handled by one justice, because every circuit has a justice assigned to it. Justice Sotomayor, being from Manhattan, I think she's from the Bronx, being the logical choice for the circuit judge for the Second Circuit, denied it. So we pick up the story there. Sotomayor did not offer an explanation, which is the court's usual procedure.
Oh, boy.
The appeal was filed Tuesday by 15 Department of Education workers who claim the city was violating their religious freedom by not accepting their exemption claims. Now, here is the part that's not only unsatisfactory, but borderline infuriating. The city requires that religious exemption requests must be backed up by religious leaders. For example, the teacher said the city would not accept an exemption from Catholics because Pope Francis had urged his flock to get their shots.
Okay, so we should require them to also get a religious person to back that statement up.
Exactly.
Who are they to be experts on the faith?
Well, and a few days ago I read a Supreme Court case that held that under no circumstances should the court involve themselves in the validity of religious practices.
Which is the First Amendment.
Exactly. Free exercise, yeah. So this is just a horrible way to go. But it's New York. It's a blue state.
It's Sotomayor, identity politics.
Yeah, identity politics, New York, Democrats, blue state, on and on. The appeal came after numerous objections to former Bill de Blasio's vaccination mandate for teachers. Boy, it's amazing you can group so many of these people
into one city. No wonder they don't sleep.
Yeah.
They have no conscience.
The city did bow to the teachers' union to allow exemptions for medical or religious reasons. Mayor Eric Adams said this week he would go ahead with terminating nearly 4,000 of the city's 400,000 municipal employees who had not been inoculated against coronavirus. So when is the insanity finally ever going to end? In New York, probably never. I mean, that's kind of a given, isn't it?
They've already imploded.
Yeah. But if this finally does get to the Supreme Court, not in the shadow docket, and that's the ruling, that in order to perfect a religious exemption, you got to have a high muckety-muck in your church verify it, then there's no more religious freedom. That's over. Okay, we have a lot of freedom of speech here on Tall Tales, and we're going to exercise it every single day. And for President Joe Biden, this is for you. Let's go, Brandon.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Is Wednesday Invasion Day? I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. That's what Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky told his people yesterday.
We are told that February 16th will be the day of attack.
President Zelensky said his information came from foreign intelligence, but the State Department disavowing any role in that.
While the U.S. says it is sharing intelligence with Ukraine in real time, both the Pentagon and State Department denied Putin has decided to invade on Wednesday.
We are not saying that
President Putin has made a final decision. We have not communicated otherwise to our partners. We believe that diplomacy continues to be viable.
Despite Russia's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, saying talks should continue and possibilities for diplomacy have not been exhausted, no sign of de-escalation.
Fox's Jackie Heinrich at the White House reports the State Department is moving the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine from Kiev to a city near the country's border with Poland. Many of the 400 truck drivers who parked their rigs in front of the Canadian Parliament building in Ottawa remain defiant in the face of threats from the Prime Minister to tow their trucks and freeze their bank accounts.
Right now, none of us are moving or leaving. We're all here until we get what we want.
Calling the truckers' protest an illegal occupation, Prime Minister Trudeau invoking the Emergency Powers Act, which has never before been used in Canada. 5 Canadian provinces are now in the process of dropping their COVID restrictions. Attorney Michael Sussman, who worked for the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign, accusing special counsel John Durham of trying to taint the jury pool for his upcoming trial on charges of lying to the FBI. Durham releasing documents over the weekend suggesting the Clinton campaign paid a tech firm to mine internet traffic from servers used by the Trump organization to falsely claim a link between Trump and a Russian bank. America is listening to Fox News.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network, the Fox News Rundown, a contrast of perspectives you won't hear anywhere else. Your daily dose of news twice a day, going far beyond the headlines, tapping into the massive reporting resources of Fox News to provide a full picture of the news of the day.
I'm Dana Perino.
I'm Brett Baer.
I'm Maria Bartiromo.
I'm Brian Kilmeade, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts. From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
Hey, it's Will Kane, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Join me as I share my thoughts on a wide range of topics, from sports and pop culture to politics and business. With the help of newsmakers and personalities, I will provide you my free, unfiltered, uncancelable opinion on the hottest topics in America.
The Will Kane Podcast. Subscribe and listen now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts. America is listening to Fox News.
The Coast Guard reports no sign of survivors in the waters off the coast of North Carolina's Outer Banks after a small plane crashed about 4 miles offshore Sunday. They have found one body and several debris fields. A man charged with trying to open an emergency door on a commercial airliner Sunday was in court yesterday.
A 31-year-old Portland, Oregon man is charged with interfering with a flight crew after prosecutors say he tried to open an emergency exit door during a Delta flight from Salt Lake City to Portland. Court documents indicate the man told police he tried to push the emergency exit handle so passengers would videotape him and he'd have the opportunity to share his thoughts on COVID-19 vaccines. A flight attendant was able to stop him, and he was detained in the back of the plane before he was arrested on the ground in Portland. Rich Dennison, Fox News.
The United